Hello and welcome to the program. This morning, Paul Howe's idea of an Accord-style Grand Compact. It's generated much publicity and discussion, but very little support from his own side, the ALP and the broader Labor movement, and lukewarm support at best from the business community. For more reaction this morning, I'm joined on the program this Thursday by Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer and Labor MP Nick Champion. Nick, first to you in Adelaide. What are your thoughts on Paul Howe's idea of the Grand Compact? Do you think it makes sense?
Well, look, I think from time to time we all pine for an era in industrial relations which was more conciliatory, where the national interest was put first, where people put sectional interests to one side and cooperated. And to that extent, Paul's right. I think there's very little chance that that will occur under the current environment and under current government, because what we've seen is inaction on the government's part on the front of jobs. We've seen it in Holden's, in GrainCorp, in SPC. We see it now in Qantas. A government sitting on its hands on jobs, or worse, chasing investors from the country. And while workers do their very level best to cooperate with companies, to make concessions to ensure future investment, we find a government that's not only indifferent to their interests, but goes out of their way to denigrate good Australian workers, whether they be on farms or in factories. So
to sum up your view, Nick, this is it pie in the sky, a good idea but unrealistic?
Well, look, if you went back a year and a half, I suggested something similar in that, Accord-style arrangements have been put in place in the past, and they are attractive in that they're conciliatory, in that the national interest is pursued above a sectional interest, and that helps cooperation. But look, I don't know, well, in fact, I'm almost sure that we'll get anything that looks like an accord under the present government. They're not interested in cooperation, they're only interested in confrontation.
Kelly O'Dwyer, why not try and seek consensus? At that level, it seems to make a whole heap of sense.
Well, far be it from me to be just a wee bit cynical about all of this talk about a compact. But I mean, is it a new compact that we're talking about, or is it really just another con? Under the previous Labor government, we saw more than 50 pieces of separate individual legislation brought in that changed the industrial relations framework, or touched upon changes to the industrial relations framework. So, it's interesting that at this point in time we're now hearing talk about further changes to the IR framework. But one of the things I would say is that the takeout that I received from what Paul Howe said yesterday was really in two parts. The first was, that he did acknowledge, and I think we should pay tribute to this, he did acknowledge that we need to have sustainable jobs growth, and we actually need to look at how wages and conditions actually impact on that. And that is something that I think that Bill Shorten needs to pay particular attention to. And the second thing he talked about and called out was corruption within the union movement. Now, that's not something that the Leader of the Opposition has himself called out. That's something, in fact, that he has really wanted to sweep under the carpet, as he has all of the other union scandals, largely because the union movement is such a strong contributor both to the parliamentary party of the Labor Party,
Kelly,
but also
do you think that far be it for me to defend Bill Shorten ahead of Nick Champion, but I think it's fair to say that he's been pretty critical of anyone involved in corruption, hasn't he? To say he's swept it under the carpet a bit much, isn't it?
I'll tell you why I make that statement about sweeping it under the carpet. And I don't think it's too strong a statement. And that's because he has the real opportunity next week to be able to follow up, what is talk on getting rid of union corruption with some real action. I mean, we have got legislation in the Parliament to restore the Australian Building and Construction Commission. Now, that has been incredibly successful in the past in exposing the thuggery, intimidation and corruption within the building and construction industry. Now, under the previous government, that was completely neutered. All their powers were taken away and the penalties taken away as well. Now, we're wanting to restore that so that we get the economic gain from that, which was for consumers around about $7.5 billion a year. A great benefit and huge productivity increases and less disruption.
Let's ask Nick about that then. Let's ask Nick, because while Bill Shorten's rhetoric has been condemning the corruption, is Kelly right that the talk hasn't been matched with the action? I mean, what is Labor doing, which you haven't changed one position on the ABCC? It makes sense to a lot of people to have that watchdog over an industry which has been plagued with this sort of stuff.
Oh, well, Kieran, the ABCC is not an anti-corruption agency. They're an agency that was there to deal with breaches of industrial law and to try and, I think, find illegal industrial action. But what we're talking about here is corruption, the payment of bribes. And as I understand it, the ABCC referred those matters to both the Australian Crime Commission and to the police. And they are the appropriate bodies to prosecute criminals. If people are paying bribes, whether they're in companies or whether they're in unions, and if people are receiving bribes, then those matters need to be sought out by the police and dealt with by courts. And that is the way we deal with corruption in business or deal with corruption in unions. And there should be the law should be pursued, with absolute zealousness and fairness. We need to make sure that people who are engaging in criminal activity are brought to account. To suggest that the ABCC is a solution to corruption is to muddy the waters to a great degree.
Nick Champion, I just want to go back to the House speech for one final comment from you on this, because it seems to me that it took Bill Shorten by surprise, the message from Paul Howes here and many within the opposition by surprise. Does it undermine your efforts to try and counter these calls for a Royal Commission, for example, or the return of the ABCC, or indeed even combating the Coalition's approach to penalty rates through the Fair Work Commission? Does this muddy the waters to that extent in your message from your side of politics?
Well, look, I wouldn't worry too much about what people in union offices or corporate offices think too much. If you walk down the street of any working class community today, any Australian community, people are worried about jobs and they're worried about wages and conditions, and that is as a direct result of Tony Abbott, who ran round this country, the workplaces in this country, in a fluoro vest, pretending he was all things to all people, and now is holed up in Canberra in a suit and tie, with certain business leaders aiming to cut wages and conditions and undermine people's job security. And so, don't worry about what, what the high flyers think. Worry about what the workers think. It's not a scare campaign, Kelly. It's not at all. Go to Shepparton.
Kelly, I want to ask you about Shepparton and the SPC issue, segue onto that, because Sharman Stone, your Liberal Party colleague in Victoria, has apparently, you'd be able to confirm that for us, forwarded correspondence from the SPC organisation detailing their position on the government's case on this $25 million, what the awards are, and trying to set out the facts here. Is there any sign of support within the Coalition party room for Sharman Stone and her argument? Any sign of a change of heart here?
Just before I get to Sharman Stone, let me just respond very quickly to the point that Nick made before about the scare campaign on award conditions and the review of the Fair Work Act. And that is something that was actually set up by the previous Labor government. The review by the Fair Work Commission of the modern awards, it was something that they set up in government. The terms were their terms. So this idea that it's somehow some great conspiracy by the current government is simply wrong, simply false. And again, as Paul Howes said yesterday, yet another example of how, parties like the Labor Party, as well as the union movement, do incite these scare campaigns and these fear campaigns. Now, when it comes to Sharman Stone, Sharman's obviously made her views on this particular issue very clear. I'm not going to go into any private correspondence that she may or may not have circulated to other members of Parliament, but you know, let me exercise my own prerogative as another backbench member, as Sharman has done, and say that I think Sharman's got it wrong on this issue. Sharman's got it wrong because we know that there are some significant problems with SPC that go beyond what, you know, the broader issues as to whether or not there needs to be a government handout. The first issue, of course, is that people are not consuming the product in the way that they once were. The second is that the investment dollars that should have been going back into the company to innovate and produce new product has not occurred. And the third, of course, is that there have been above award conditions at the company. It doesn't matter what pamphlet's been put out to try and dispute this fact. The clear reality is that even just with the example of redundancy pay, we see that the majority of workers there have redundancy pay of up to 2 years, which is well above the award.
But this 25 million was about a growth. Nick, I'll come to you in a moment. I just want to stay with Kelly for the moment here. The 25 million was meant to go towards a growth plan to fix some of these things that you refer to, and it was going to be dwarfed by the company's own contribution compared to the government's. I think the company, from memory, was going to contribute 150 million. So they were going to address a number of those things you talk about. Now, isn't there also an argument, Kelly O'Dwyer, that you, as a government, have a responsibility to try and attract private enterprise and keep private enterprise in regional areas like the Goulburn Valley?
Well, it's certainly not the government's role, though, to fund operational changes in profitable companies. That is not our job. It's not the job of taxpayers to fund this sort of activity in companies. Coca-Cola Amatil, of course, is very, very, very profitable. It's a $9 billion company, and it received a profit after tax of something like $215 odd million just in a 6-month period. Now, that's the parent company of SPC. I think it makes a lot of sense for SPC to be looking to its parent company if it does have a sustainable business model going forward, and ask their parent company to fund these sorts of innovations and changes.
Nick, that seems to me to be the most... That seems to me to be the most compelling point the coalition has made on all of this. That this, I think again, it makes sense to a lot of people watching this debate that if the parent company is so well established and so well positioned, surely it's incumbent upon them to provide these additional funds for this growth plan that SPC Ardmona had sought.
Well, look, in relation to SPC Ardmona, I mean, it's not like the parent company wasn't going to put in a significant investment. I think they're going to put in over $100 million into this investment in regional Australia at a time which is very, very difficult for this industry. Very high Australian dollar destroying export markets and ultra competition in import markets from dumped goods. So what they're saying is, the company's prepared to put the money in, but they need some co-investment, their single one-off $25 million grant to make it work. But the coalition would rather have longer unemployment queues in places like Shepparton, which already have very high unemployment. They'd rather pay the dole to people than to give a one-off $25 million grant. They'd rather cause massive economic dislocation as far as Queensland for bean farmers and for hundreds of fruit growers, people who are traditional coalition supporters. They'd rather cause chaos in those industries than pay a one-off grant. And, you know, Kelly bangs on about redundancy pay. Well, you can't blame unions and workers for clinging onto their redundancy pay under this government, because there's every likelihood that they'll be using it. Every likelihood that they'll need it, because they won't have jobs. They're not going to have jobs.
It's about the principle of the matter as well, though, isn't it? To change the mindset of corporate welfare, that if you've got a profitable parent company, why should they not fund the 170 million instead of the 150 million? That's the point here. Why do taxpayers have to stump up the rest?
Well, Kieran, every day in this country, right, every day in this country, corporations receive government help. The healthcare industry receives a massive government rebate. We don't hear Kelly calling for that to be reduced. There is massive rebates on diesel fuel to the mining industry and to the farming industry, but you don't hear Kelly talking about that. It's a very, very selective approach, and it's aimed at places like Shepparton, and it's aimed at places like Elizabeth, and they are basically trying to make these communities pay for Joe Hockey's principles, so Joe Hockey can stand up in the Parliament and say he's against corporate welfare. Well, we know it's a very, very selective set of judgments that they're making, a very selective set of judgments.
We've got to take a break. We'll be right back on AM Agenda with Nick Champion and Kelly O'Dwyer.
Today, Trafalgar invited us to Jean-Pierre and Evelyn's home.
Everyone got a kiss.
This family run a vineyard that just took us all in.
And we spent a day sitting under a beautiful big tree. Sun was shining, great food, and the wine was magic.
Experiencing this local secret, completely hidden away, was just amazing.
Book your Trafalgar holiday now and save up to $1,270 per couple. Visit trafalgar.com or call your travel agent today.
Count the number of batteries you rely on every day. Now multiply it by 7.6 million households. As the demand for battery power increases, plan for a positive future today with your own Battery World franchise.
I have a great deal of confidence in my Suncorp car insurance. And I can get a great deal too.
Now there's even more ways to save on new Suncorp comprehensive car insurance, including a better price for driving low kilometres, a 15% multi-policy discount, rewards for claims-free driving, plus $50 off for buying new online. So get a quote today online or call us on 13 11 55.
9 out of 10 people believe Colgate Sensitive Pro Relief is more effective at relieving their tooth sensitivity than other sensitive toothpaste they have used. Prove it to yourself. Go online, request a free sample, and take the Colgate Sensitive Pro Relief Challenge for superior lasting relief.
When you're carrying kids, you need eyes in the back of your head. And how about eyes in the side of your head too? With blind spot monitoring, lane departure warning and forward obstruction warning, you're not going to miss a thing.
I saw that, James.
Mazda CX-9, the 7-seat sensation.
Hi, it's Kitty from Progressive Car Insurance. We bought this 15-second ad to tell you that we can save you money because we're 100% online. And I think it worked.
Ready to save on comprehensive car insurance? Visit progressiveonline.com.au.
How can Officeworks print and copy service help your business? Well, we can print these.
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 These. All these.
And of course, these. You name it, we can print it.
Copy that.
Kickstart your year with The Australian. The journalists and global resources to keep you ahead of the ups, downs, ins, outs, movers, shakers and the fakers of business. Know business so you can be the business. The Australian. Pick it up today.
Looking for a financial services company that's not owned by a bank? IOOF, proudly independent for over 150 years. To find out more, speak with your financial advisor today.
This is AM Agenda. Thank you very much for your company this Thursday morning with me, Nick Champion and Kelly O'Dwyer. On to the issue of Qantas, Kelly O'Dwyer. It seems from the Treasurer's comments to the Australian Financial Review that the government is open to providing additional support through a debt guarantee or something of that nature in the absence of relaxing the Qantas Sale Act, which is what the Treasurer and the Prime Minister want to do eventually anyway, to allow foreign investment into the airline. What's the difference, though? Can you explain the difference between the Qantas situation and this other corporate welfare that we've been talking about earlier in the program?
Well, I think the important point to make is that the Treasurer has not actually said that we're going to be providing Qantas with any form of bailout, nor has the Prime Minister. I think that the comments in the Financial Review, if you read them carefully, in fact simply say that we recognise that Qantas is in a pretty difficult situation because they have to abide by very special rules and conditions, and that is regulated under the Qantas Sale Act. That puts particular foreign investment limitations on investment within Qantas and also competitive restrictions on how they do business. And the point that was being made in the Australian Financial Review article is that, you know, if we want there to be genuine and fair competition in the airline industry, we need to look again at the Qantas Sale Act. And the Labor Party already, before we've even looked at the Qantas Sale Act, have already ruled out that they're in fact going to consider changes so that there can be fair competition for Qantas.
So because it's subject to greater regulation, it should then be subject to a different consideration, hence a debt guarantee, something that could eventuate.
What I'm saying is that if there's going to be a level playing field, you have to look at the Qantas Sale Act. If you want to consider...
But in the absence of that, that's not happening. That's not going to happen with the current Senate. So a debt guarantee, is that fair, given the other restrictions facing the airline?
Well, let's actually get the Labor Party and the Greens to explain their position on this, why they actually think that there shouldn't be any change to the Qantas Sale Act. Let's not get ahead of that original discussion, because I think that that is very much on the table, and I think it's incumbent upon them to explain why it is that they want there to be different rules for Qantas.
Well, Qantas is getting ahead of that discussion. They want a debt guarantee sooner rather than later. Nick Champion, would you support that? And also your response to Kelly O'Dwyer's argument about the Qantas Sale Act. Is it time to relax those rules, to allow the airline to compete?
Well, no. We believe in a national carrier. It's important for an island nation, which has a lot of geographically remote areas, to have a national carrier. And once you lose a national carrier, it's that much more expensive to set up again. So I'd be very reluctant to entertain changes to the Qantas Sale Act, which would obviously mean a foreign takeover and the loss of a national carrier, I would imagine. And I suppose the second thing is what we've seen from this government is that they've blocked investment in GrainCorp, they've chased Holden from the country, they're refusing to help SPC, and now they're confused on Qantas. We have various sort of musings and wonderings and sort of question marks raised in the papers, in our financial papers of all things, about the direction the government may or may not take. How about this? They're the government, they're responsible for these things. It's up to them to put a proposal on the table for either the Parliament or the community to discuss, and then we can have that discussion. But at the moment, what we've got is sort of this idle speculation and navel-gazing from from the government, and it's simply not good enough.
You talk about this, the notion of a national carrier, and that's all well and good, but should the airline be in a position where the government has to prop it up? Surely, if that's where it's left, isn't it better to attract foreign investment and make sure the business is a viable one into the future? Because at the moment, it's making, well, the profit warning, I think, was $300 million loss for 6 months.
Well, yes, Karen, that might be all part of a discussion, or if you had a proposal. But the problem with losing a national carrier is what would happen is airlines would compete for profitable routes, and what would happen is remote Australia, regional Australia, would suffer increasingly from less and less services and less access to aviation services. So, I think we have to be very, very careful that we don't injure the national interest in the long term to try and gain some short-term gain. There's a lot of competition and a lot of state-run companies in the aviation industry at the moment, but they won't always serve our national interest.
Nick Champion, Kelly O'Dwyer, we're out of time. Appreciate it today. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Great.
A quick break on AM Agenda. We'll be right back with Jason Clare, the Shadow Communications Minister.